Before I bring in the front benches, I just want to say at the front benches I would like to leave 2 or 3 minutes for Paul Scully to sum up. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I rise to speak on behalf of the Scottish National Party, which is the third party in this chamber and the principal party in Scotland. But I think I speak on behalf of the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland when we place on record our support for the Grenfell campaigners in trying to get to the bottom of what was visited upon them. We watched in horror at the scenes unfolding on our television screens on the 14th of June last year, conscious of the unimaginable terrors that were being visited upon the people trapped inside. And in the months that have passed, that sense of horror, I think, has given way to a sense of solidarity and a desire to stand with the people of Grenfell in trying to get the answers to the questions that they so richly deserve. And I want to associate my party and myself with the comments of a member for Kensington, and I take her advice about how it's very easy in this debate, and we've witnessed it, people getting platitudinous about how they describe the campaigners. I do want to make one point, though, that in what I've observed as to how the Grenfell campaigners have prosecuted their case, it seems to me that they have a level of integrity which is head and shoulders above those from whom they are seeking redress. And I think that is highly commendable. In the aftermath of this tragedy, I think most members here who also represent urban constituencies were concerned about another question as well, and that was, could it happen again, and could it happen here? And that is something that preoccupied many of us, which is why in my own city of Edinburgh, where there are 44 high-rise tower blocks managed by the local authority and another 80 in the private sector, I commend the work of the officers of the City Council and the Fire Service, who very swiftly did a review, which wasn't a desk review, it was an inspection on the ground, which concluded that the materials which had been used in the Grenfell cladding were not in use in my city, for which I am grateful. I am grateful also that the Scottish Government's undertaken a review of safety regulations in tower blocks and trying to improve on the 2005 fire regulations, which are already more stringent than apply in the rest of the United Kingdom. But I cannot be satisfied that, and indeed complacent, that it will not happen again until we know the outcome of this inquiry, until the questions about how this happened, why it happened, and what needs to be done to make sure it doesn't happen again are actually put in the public sphere. And that's why I support these campaigners in fighting for the widest possible and most effective inquiry that we can get. In terms of the points that the petitioners have made, I want to try and address them. A lot of people have talked about the fact that it's welcome news, and it is welcome news that the Prime Minister has decided to widen the leadership of the inquiry process and appoint advisers. But like others, I too am bemused that it has taken months of campaigning, parliamentary debates, 150,000 people signing a petition to grant what is surely the most reasonable of requests in these circumstances. And I say this to the government ministers, and I would invite them to respond. What is critical now is who these appointees actually are. It seems to me incumbent upon the government to ensure that whoever is put in a position to advise and support the chair of this inquiry, they must not only have empathy with the survivors of Grenfell and with the relatives of those who paid the ultimate price in this tragedy, but they must understand and know what they're going through, and they must also have the confidence of the community of Grenfell. And if the government allows this inquiry to go ahead in a situation where those leading it do not have the confidence of the people who are at the centre of this matter, then I believe the inquiry will be stillborn, and we will go through a circuitous history of inquiries in this country, which we've been down before, frankly. And this is an opportunity now to get it right. In terms of the second aspect of the petitioner's case, that about what is happening right now to the people who survived, I find it, frankly, unbelievable that nearly a year later there are so many people languishing in temporary accommodation who have not yet been given a proper permanent roof over their heads after undergoing this horror. I just don't understand it. And I say to those who mentioned the unfortunate term political football earlier that I'm not making a political football of this, but to pretend that this can be divorced from policy and from political considerations is naivety bordering on the irresponsible.
Hear, hear.
And therefore, I think questions have to be asked of what is happening in Kensington and Chelsea and the people who are in charge of public administration in that area. And the historical context is apt here. It is no coincidence that Kensington and Chelsea has always been one of the boroughs, indeed one of the parts of the country, with the lowest proportion of public housing. I'll put this in words perhaps that the honourable gentleman from Spelthorne might agree with. I don't want to make it a party political football, but let's put it this way. In Kensington and Chelsea, it is clear that the majority of people who have the fortune to live in that area are relatively well off, relatively content. And what has happened now, I believe, is that public administration in that borough is being executed by and in the interests of those people who are well off and relatively content. And those who are at the other end of this unequal society, their needs are not being adequately listened to and they are not being put into public policy. I cannot see any other reason why it would be the case that these people have not been rehoused almost a year later. And I think, my honourable colleague mentioned the right to buy. This is not irrelevant neither. And I don't condemn, I don't criticise the people who bought their council house over the last 20 years. But I condemn the people who sold it to them because they did so without any thought as to what the consequence of that policy would be. And the consequence of it now is that there isn't enough housing to go round, and when a catastrophe like this happens, the public authority is unable to respond to it. And that is simply not good enough. And I wondered just how difficult it would be, even if you had to rely on the public sector, because I've had conversations with colleagues, and I said, well, why don't you just buy some houses? Why don't you just take the money and go and acquire some houses in the private sector? That's what local authorities used to do, and it was explained to me how difficult this was and how expensive it all was. So I checked on the way to this debate today. And yes, it is true that some of the house prices in Kensington and Chelsea are bordering on the obscene. There are dozens of places available to buy in excess of £20 million. But I put into the filter on rightmove.co.uk this question. I said, how many family-sized properties, 2 bedrooms or greater, are there today in Kensington and Chelsea on the market at a price tag of less than £1 million, which is a reasonable price, I would thought, for central London? The answer is 512 properties today on sale in Kensington and Chelsea, which could house these families. So I suggest to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea that they go and get some of them and move these people into them. But the question here is for ministers, to be honest, because this has been going on for nearly a year. And what we need to hear from ministers is that they are prepared to set a deadline on the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, by which time they must provide a plan for the permanent rehousing of every one of the Grenfell survivors. And if that deadline is not met, then I think it is incumbent upon the government to take the matter into their own hands and to make sure that this is delivered, because they cannot hide behind this inadequate excuse of leaving it to the local authority anymore. The final point that the petitioners have made is about the need to listen to the conclusions of this inquiry. And I don't want to preempt what they are, but I seek assurances from ministers in just 2 regards. If this inquiry demonstrates that there is a need to change policy in terms of housing provision and financing and regulation in this country, will they commit to bringing forward legislation in order to enact those recommendations, or will they not? And the second reassurance I want is that if this inquiry finds that there are people responsible, and if indeed it is the case, as many suspect, that the real problem here is not in the original construction of the block, but in the rehabbing that took place between 2014 and 2016, and the decisions that were made that arguably put price above the health and safety and well-being of individuals. If that is demonstrated to be the case, and I want an assurance from the government that those responsible will face the consequences of their actions and that they will be charged and subject to criminal proceedings if that is the relevant matter to do. So I hope that the government will give us these assurances. And I finish by saying that the one good thing in all of this is that because of the experience that these people have been through, we have an organised community which is sceptical and critical, and which will keep an eye on this inquiry and come back to us in this place and get our support any time that they need it, because they speak not just for the people of Grenfell. The actions they are taking to make sure this inquiry works will benefit all of the people of this country.
Hear, hear, hear.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and it's